What's going on, everybody? Happy Thursday. Hope you're doing well. My name's Ian Douglas. I'm the author of this website, techinterview.guide, and welcome to the live stream. Just watching chat already. Wildcat Annie, good to see you in chat. Hello, hello. And let's see what else we got going on here tonight. We got stream going on over on LinkedIn. People asking if I got a haircut. Nah, I got a bunch of them cut. Yeah. All right, the hooligans are here. Did Ian get a haircut? He got a bunch of them cut. Yeah. Um, Python Nate, I like the name. Wildcat Annie, good to see you in chat. Thanks for dropping by. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. Yeah, so I'm just going to go through some questions and answers. Next Thursday, I'm going to have a panel of folks on. We're just going to talk about developer relations, developer advocacy, what that kind of role is in the tech industry, how to get into that kind of role, what the interview process is like, all that good stuff. So come check that out next Thursday. We're going to have folks from New Relic. We're going to have folks from PayPal. We're going to have folks from a bunch of companies. I think there's going to be half a dozen of us talking. So it'll be wildly chaotic. It's going to be great. This coming Sunday, I think I'm going to be streaming. One of my kids has a birthday coming up, so we'll have to see. We might do his birthday dinner Sunday, maybe Monday. We're not sure yet. So I'll keep everybody posted, but I think I'm going to be streaming this coming Sunday. I've got another guest lined up for the end of March. I got to get the schedule updated on the website this weekend, and I'm hoping to find some other guests during the month of March as well too. So Zooey, good to see you. Yeah, good lineup. Yeah, so a whole bunch of folks. So it's gonna be great. I gotta get like an infographic together with everybody's headshot and like start promoting that on LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. So if you all can help me, if you see that drop on Twitter or LinkedIn, please reshare it with your network. On LinkedIn, I think if you like it, like then your contacts will see that you've liked it, and that'll help expose it. But if you can also help share it, I'd really appreciate it. If you're watching this on YouTube later, please like and subscribe. I'm bad at marketing, so you got to help me. So hit the like button, all that good stuff. Oh, I got my automated thing already. So yeah, drop questions in chat at any time. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, if you want your question to show up in this panel over here on the left, you're gonna have to come over to Twitch. But if you do leave comments on LinkedIn, I will be paying attention to those as we go. Otherwise, I'm just going to be going through typical Q&A kind of format. I don't think I saw any new resumes come in for review. Let me just double check that real quick. I did not have any new resumes come in, but if you do want a resume review, you're welcome to submit it here at this link, techinterview.guide/resume review. I am doing them for free. So just drop it in there to, just send me a PDF file. And the only thing I ask is that you anonymize your phone number and your email address, like your contact info. If you want to anonymize your name too, that's totally all right. But yeah, send those resumes over. We'll get those reviewed. So I've got one guest who also does interview preparation. His name is Taylor. I'm actually going to be on Taylor's podcast sometime in the not too distant future, I think. Anyway, Taylor has agreed to be on the stream here with me. That's going to be the last Sunday of March, I believe. And then I was on a podcast with, what do they call it? The Launchies. So a couple of folks from New Relic, Danny and Lauren, have got a new podcast that they're doing. Well, it's actually season 2 of their podcast. And I'm going to be on that soon. They've had some really great people on the podcast already, and I'm happy to say I'm going to be one of them. And they're basically just doing a whole podcast series on tech interview prep and so on. And so I get on there and kind of rant and rave a little and share my thoughts as I do. And then let's see what else we got going on. I'm also going to be on the Scrimba podcast in the near future as well. So yeah, I've been busy doing stuff on the side, just getting the advice out there. Been really enjoying that and providing all this for free. I don't do this to make money. Anything that gets donated to me, any sort of merchandise sales from like mugs and things like that, I'm pooling, and I'm going to be totally transparent about it. It's going to be up on the website. Any money that I have come into the website because of the efforts that I put into this are all going out. So I'm going to 100% any money that comes in is going back out. And it's basically going to go to code schools and boot camps and things like that, where diversity in tech is the primary mission of the school. It's something that I care deeply about, and it's something that I'm going to financially support using any money that I get as income from the stream. So thanks for dropping by. Thanks for hanging out. Happy to have everybody here. Got a handful of viewers already, so good to see everybody. Let's see, what else is going on this week? work's been busy this week. Trying to get caught up on things and trying to stay organized on stuff. Um, when you start a new job, it's always pretty overwhelming. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of people to meet. There's just a lot going on, and especially when you get into a senior level role, they have kind of higher expectations of your capabilities and what you should be able to do and how you contribute. And so I'm starting to feel the pressure on that a little bit, but it's good. I'm looking forward to it. I've been doing some live streaming during the day, so you'll see down below my picture here. I do have an alternate work account called Ian the Postmanot. If you can go give that a follow, I'd appreciate it. You don't have to come hang out at lunch, but they are kind of like paying attention to the audience that I have on there. So if you can drop a follow there, I'd appreciate it. Let's see what else is going on. I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, Taylor Dorset's going to be on the stream the end of March. Let's go grab that whole lineup that we got coming next week, because that's going to be a really good lineup. Next week, I've got somebody from PayPal, a couple of folks from New Relic, and a couple other folks. I forget what company they're with, and I feel bad, but I will go look them up. But yeah, it's gonna be a really good lineup. So I've got 5 other people confirmed plus me, and so yeah, we're just gonna roundtable like, what is DevRel, what's the interview process like? You know, do you have to be extroverted to do developer relations? How do you put together like technical talks and technical content and stuff like that? So it should be a pretty good panel. And we'll talk about like what their interview process was like getting into their job, and we'll dare to compare, like PayPal versus New Relic versus, what my interview process was at Postman, all kind of stuff. Zooey says the Postman streams are great. I appreciate that. Watching me struggle through learning all this stuff. It's actually quite a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it. And I got a nice compliment from one of my teammates today that has been coming and hanging out on some of the streams. They basically said, like, you do a really good job, like, teaching and all that kind of stuff. I did a blindfold challenge today, and they gave me some feedback. They're like, you did well in the challenge, but, people wanted to see your process. And I often had stuff, like, on other screens because I got all these monitors in front of me. And they're like, next time if we do a stream like that, like, make sure that you're sharing, like, all of your browser windows just so that people can see what your process is, what you're looking up. And I'm like, oh, yeah, should have known that as a teacher. Like, you got to show that process. So I will do better, and I appreciate the feedback. But yeah, I appreciate, like, G&D 404 has been by for some of the lunchtime streams. So I appreciate all of you hanging out for sure. G&D 404, how long have you been doing the whole streaming content creation? Joves PL? Joves Pie? Not sure how to pronounce your username, but welcome to the stream. I'll give you some blinky lights, some applause. Thanks for dropping by. How long have I been doing streaming? So I've been doing live stream for the Tech Interview Guide since last July. I've been at Postman now. This is getting close to the end of my 4th week at Postman. And Jove SP. Oh, hey. Good to see you. Thanks for dropping by. The live streaming that I'm doing at Postman, I've been doing, I think I started my first week. I started doing, so they've got this 30-day challenge that I'm working through, and I've only got a couple of days left on the challenge. And when I get to day 30, I'm actually giving away a copy of a graphic novel that we made called The API First World. And so if you give that account a follow, Ian the Postmanot, the link's down under my picture here, go follow that account. And when I do day 30, I'm not telling you when I'm going to get to day 30, but when I do day 30, I'm going to do a giveaway. I'm going to ship this anywhere in the world. So I'm looking forward to having more folks come by and participate in that. But it's a lot of fun just going through all the different kinds of product features in the Postman program, like the web application, the desktop application. It does so much stuff now. Like it's almost one of those environments that you never have to leave the environment to do like all the work that you're doing around like API design and testing and mock servers and collaboration, and you can do pull requests and all that kind of stuff all within the tool. You can synchronize things, you can collaborate as teams, and you can see things change in real time as your team members are changing things. Like, it's a fantastic tool. When I taught it at Turing back in the day, I was only using it for the API requests and then like saving that in a collection, and it does so much more now. It's pretty fantastic. But for me, now I'm like getting caught up on all the stuff that I never knew how to use. And so it feels like kind of a lot. And then I'm also like trying to produce content for the company as well. So been doing live streaming now for a little while, gradually like getting better lights and stuff like that, and figuring out how to control the lights so I can like turn them on and off with like a click of a button, or I can like, tell my home assistant run by the Alphabet company. I don't want to say the name because then my phone activates. I can have it like turn all these lights on and off, turn the monitor on and off, all that kind of stuff. So I'm just trying to find ways of automating things, and actually have a little demo that I'm putting together that I'm going to demo at the company next week. I hope that shows them how it's watching the Twitch follower count on this Ian the Postmanot account. And when it sees that follower count go up or somebody new follows, it's going to make these lights blink. And I'm hoping to demo it in a way that if somebody actually follows that account during the demo, like everybody will actually see them blink. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun just, working with the team. We've got an amazing team, very supportive team. Like we get together, several times a week and just chat about what's going on. So yeah, it's pretty wild. It's been 4 weeks already. I still feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose. Had a really good chat with a company partner today at Dolby. They've got some amazing APIs for doing like sound processing and stuff like that. Like you literally send them sound files and they process it in their cloud and they'll send it back to you all like cleaned up and all kind of stuff. I'm like, hey, I should use that for my podcast. I don't know that it'll make my voice sound any better, but it can't hurt. Can't get any worse. But thanks for dropping by tonight. So yeah, so the agenda tonight is just to go through some more backlog of Q&A. I've got a whole bunch of questions that I'm going to pull up, and I will try to write them in the prompt down under my picture as soon as I find that other browser tab that I had open. There it is. So yeah, so I'm just going to go through some questions, but by all means, please drop more questions in chat. And again, if you're watching on LinkedIn and you want them to show up over here, you will need to come over to Twitch and you will need to watch over there. I do see that I've got a handful of people watching on LinkedIn, so you can absolutely leave comments on LinkedIn. You can leave comments on the video, and I will see those as we go. But if you want your comment to show up in this panel over here, you are going to have to come over to Twitch. So if you care about it like showing up on on the stream over here, you will need to come over to twitch.tv/IanDouglas736. I'll drop that in the chat over there. So actually just got a comment on LinkedIn, says it's my first time dropping by. I do have a question. So yeah, you're absolutely welcome to ask questions. So yeah, go ahead. I always hesitate to say the person's name if they're commenting on the other platform. I also decided not to stream to Facebook anymore. But I guess since people's names are showing up in Twitch, I guess people are going to see your comment on LinkedIn. So I'll just say Jasmine. Jasmine, nice to have you hanging out on LinkedIn. So when I'm looking over here, I'm actually looking at the LinkedIn panel. So yeah, Jasmine, you're absolutely welcome to ask questions. Just drop it in a comment there, as you did. And I will absolutely ask that on the stream and kind of give you my thoughts and perspectives. So my whole stream is just perspectives. I've been in the industry for 26 years. Those that don't know me, been in the industry a while. It's how I got all the life highlights going on here. I won't call them gray hairs. They're life highlights. Been in the industry for a while. I've been an interviewer for 15 years. I've been an engineering manager. I've been a director of engineering. I've held a lot of roles doing like DevOps work, programming work, DBA duties, web hosting, like all kinds of stuff. Now I'm in developer relations. I've done a lot of things. So I've got a lot of perspective, and this stream is just me sharing my perspectives. So by all means, ask questions, and I will absolutely get to those. So Jove asks a question in chat. I think we'll start with that one. Actually, love your content. Your video on how to reduce the LeetCode grind is what made me join in today. Awesome. I'm giving myself 3 to 4 months of study time, 2 to 3 hours a day. Do you have any recommendations on how to schedule LeetCoding to make the most of my time? 2 to 3 hours a day is a lot, especially if you're working full time. It's going to feel pretty overwhelming if you're trying to do that frequency every single day. So I would say like make sure if you're going to go like that, if you're going to sort of schedule it that way for yourself, also give yourself a break from time to time. Like you wouldn't go work out at the gym 2 to 3 hours a day every single day. You need a rest day. Like you got to rest the muscles, and same thing with your brain. It's good that you're putting in that amount of study, but I would absolutely take a break from time to time, like, once or twice a week, take an evening off and just kind of let the stuff soak in. So the LeetCode, one of the LeetCode videos that I've gotten, I'll link to the YouTube here. you can just go search for the word leak code and you'll see my two main videos on there about shortcutting the leak code grind and then reverse engineering other people's answers. And the video about shortcutting the leak code grind talks about how to schedule different kinds of problems, or what we call patterns. So like depth first search, breadth first search, heap problems, 2-pointer problems, fast and slow pointers, and so on, is coming up with a schedule every day of like Monday is going to be like a depth first search and then like maybe redo a couple of problems from before. Tuesday is going to be breadth first search. Wednesday is going to be a heap problem. Then I'm going to go back and do the depth first search that I did 2 days prior. And then Thursday is going to be like a fast and slow pointer. And then I'm going to redo the breadth first search that I did on Tuesday, you know, sort of thing. And so like coming up with a rotation, but you do need a day off. One thing that I have recommended, and I think it's in one of those videos, is whatever day you sort of take off, just go find a random problem. Don't use Sean Prashad's website where you're like, okay, let me go find what pattern of problem I want to practice today. Just go find a random one and see whether your brain kind of picks up on like, oh, this sounds like a fast and slow pointer problem, or this sounds like a sliding window problem. See how quickly you can recognize the pattern of the problem on your own when you're just picking up a random one. That might be a good thing to do sort of on your rest day, is don't actually try to solve the problem, but just look through a couple and see whether you're recognizing the pattern of the problem. If you recognize the pattern, then that's good. Because if you're practicing those patterns and studying them over and over, then you're going to get really good at actually coding those up kind of as we go. So as far as like how to schedule that time, I would follow that first YouTube video where it talks about like try to pick a different type of problem every day, and then also try to repeat problems that you've done on previous days. But again, it depends. Everybody's a little bit different as far as how much time they have to invest in that kind of thing. And also like what sort of effort you want to put in. So some people are just like, oh, I just want to grind like 500 problems or 200 problems or whatever. And I kind of think like, you know, if you can grind like 10 problems of each pattern, that's only like maybe 70, 80 problems, maybe 100 at most. But a lot of the patterns get kind of repetitive, like fast and slow pointer, 2-pointer, sliding window. Those are all array problems really at the end of the day. And so I think that you can actually shortcut that just by seeing the patterns and sort of understanding how to recognize the pattern of the problem. I think that's going to be a better use of your time, and then studying the patterns as opposed to just grinding problems day after day after day after day. So Jove says, during the work week, weekends are for the family. Yeah, that's great. I guess it's a matter of trusting the process. I've been following it for a week so far. I have the strongest urge to go through multiple problems of a single pattern. I mean, you can do that. So I worked with somebody who had the mindset of like doing one thing 10 times is better than doing 10 things once. And I kind of agree, but doing that one problem 10 times over is a bit excessive. And that's kind of why I said in that one YouTube video, like if you can practice that one again, like 2 or 3 more times, that's probably all you need to really understand that particular problem. The next time you see a problem like it, you're like, oh, that's just like that other problem that I've done a bunch. But you do have to kind of cycle back and like see those problems again and again to really recognize them and understand how to solve that pattern. So you can do multiple problems of a pattern. You might be better though getting to the point where once you solve it, erase the code and do it over again right away. Because then it's just going to like really help kind of cement that in your brain about how to solve that kind of problem. That would be one way that I would tackle that. Cool. Jasmine asked a question over on LinkedIn, so I'm going to go get to that, and then I'll come back to chat over here. Mulberry, good to see you in chat there too. I'll get to your question in just a moment. Jasmine asked in LinkedIn chat, I'm interviewing for a company next week that doesn't really hire juniors, only mid to senior level software engineers. The position I'm interviewing for is a front-end engineering role with a variety of technologies such as JavaScript, TypeScript, and React. The company hasn't hired juniors. They also don't really have an interview process for juniors in place. This will be my first software engineering role, and I connected with a recruiter via mutual connection. My virtual technical interview is scheduled with an experienced developer. It'll cover technical stuff, as I was told in the email invite that I may need to have my IDE ready and also be ready to screen share, but no other information was given as to what kind of technical question to expect. Also, there wasn't any info on their interview process on Glassdoor. Is it fair to assume it would be centered around data structures and algorithms? In case I get into another situation like this one, how do I best prepare for a tech interview with limited information? And then followed up with a too long didn't read. How do I best prepare for a tech interview? Well, that's why I'm here. This is how to prepare for your tech interview. That's a great question, Jasmine. I appreciate you asking. If you don't know like really what to study, and they haven't really told you, and they're just like, get ready to have an IDE open and share your screen, it's pretty open-ended. Knowing that they have a tech stack of JavaScript, TypeScript, and React, I would probably study those a little bit, but then also be ready for just like a little technical challenge of, manipulate this array or search through an array or show me how you do like a for each to, here's an array of numbers and go multiply them all by 5 or something like that and return a new array and then find every odd number or something and, return that. I don't know. It may be something along those lines. It could be as easy as that. If they don't have any juniors on the team, though, I feel a little worried that the interview might be more complex than they think. As a senior dev, one of my problem areas when I got into teaching was this mindset of like, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. Like, this is easy for everybody. And that's not always the case. And interviewers especially have to be very mindful of that when they go in to interview somebody with a lower amount of skill, they also have to make sure it's an appropriate level problem for that person to try to solve. And if their team is all made up of intermediate and senior level devs, and you're going to be the first junior dev potentially, my worry is that the interview might be a little bit hard, and then they're going to kind of evaluate that after the fact and go, like, I'm not trying to jinx it and say you're not going to do well, but if you don't do well, they're not going to know whether it was your skill level or the fact that what they asked was too hard. Although they might have the same suspicion the other way. If you absolutely crush it, they're like, well, was the problem too easy or are you really that good? So these are things that they have to try to evaluate as part of that interview process. And so hopefully it's more than one stage. I would be prepared to show them some samples of JavaScript. If you've used TypeScript, then be prepared to talk about that a little bit. And if you've done work in React, then absolutely be ready to like maybe write a new component or alter a component, something along those lines. But yeah, I would also be prepared to do just some really, I don't want to say simple, but understand like some of the more common algorithmic type of problems that you could get asked as a front-end developer. Front-end developers, I actually got into a bit of a debate, I think would be the friendly word for it. It wasn't an argument. It was a debate with a coworker when I worked at Turing. They worked on the front-end program. I was teaching the back-end program, and I was doing mock interviews with front-end students and asking them problems that they thought were kind of unfair and too hard for front-end developers because front-end developers weren't being asked too many algorithmic types of problems. But I'm actually seeing more and more people nowadays who are going for front-end interviews that are being asked these kinds of problems. Like I think we've got a couple of folks in chat, like Zooey. I'd be curious, Zooey, if like what kind of algorithmic type problems you got asked during your interview process for the job that you're starting in a month-ish or so. And if there are other front-end devs in chat, I'd love to see kind of like any perspectives any of you have around what kinds of things to study as a front-end dev. I would still say study some amount of algorithmic challenges, but hopefully the company wants you to actually demonstrate your skill in JavaScript, TypeScript, and React, since that's their tech stack. Unfortunately, though, a lot of companies still really lean into and rely on like the leak code style problems. So again, I would try to do a balance of both of those. I would also push back on the recruiter and say like, hey, just for the better use of my study time ahead of this, should I be focusing on algorithms or should I be focusing on JavaScript and React? Like where should I be spending my time? They should be transparent with you about that. So I would go from there. Jove says in chat, iOS engineer, so pretty much front end, getting leak code mediums on interviews. Wow. But I'm also interviewing on mid to top tier companies. Yeah. So mid to top tier companies, they are going to ask the much harder style leak code problems for sure. So yeah, I would still lean in a little bit on the algorithmic thinking. So hopefully that'll help you out. Jasmine, again, thanks for asking that question on LinkedIn. Appreciate that. All right, let's go back over to chat here. Melbury had a question. Do you have any planned resume reviews coming up? I haven't had any new resumes come in, but if you want to drop me a resume, here's the link to do it. You can absolutely send that over. If you're watching on LinkedIn, It's just techinterview.guide. You'll actually see a link on the side for resume reviews, and or you can just go to techinterview.guide/resume review, all one word. And so yeah, just head over to the website and you can upload it from there. Once I get probably 2 or 3 of them, then I'll probably do like an evening of resume reviews. So yeah, you're welcome to submit those at any time, and once I get a couple, then I'll spend an evening doing resume reviews there. Zooey said in chat, I applied for a front-end position early on. I was asked a pretty complicated question where you have a typical setup with a phone. I had to write a function that takes in a number. Yeah, so Zooey had to like parse a phone number and say whether or not the phone number was an easy number to dial based on the proximity of the numbers on the dial pad, which is very much a, sort of a depth first search, but also like when you think about it as like a 3x3 grid plus the 0, like what's the distance between the numbers as you have to kind of navigate around the grid. You could set that up a little bit ahead of time and say like, if the number is a 1, then, here's the spacing to all the other numbers. And for a 2, here's all the spacing to the other numbers. And then as you iterate over the number, you can just look that stuff up in a hash. And so you could just do like a linear pass to calculate all those values. And then later on, just say, what number am I on? What's the next number? And, what's the difference, or what's the spacing based on that lookup that you do? It's an interesting problem for sure. Joe says it sounds like a graph type problem. No, I think it's more like just a grid. It's more a grid problem. You're not really navigating the grid to keep finding that node over and over again. So in that sense, it's not really like a graph. I would think of it more like a 2-dimensional array of like 3x4, because you still have like the asterisk and the pound key on the dial pad. But I think Zooey's problem was just the numbers. And so it was basically like based on the numbers, like how far apart are they? And if it's more than like one space apart, it's like harder to dial. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting problem from that perspective. Like go rank all these phone numbers based on sort of the complexity of the phone number. So he said, the company I got hired with had me talk through my solo project and my group project. It was a nice interview. It's really nice when the interviews are just conversation, for sure. I say that on the stream a lot. Interviews need to be conversation, not interrogation. The interviewer did mention a hash table would have helped with the first interview. Yeah, so just putting all that stuff in a hash table, because then as you're going through the phone number, it's just like an 01 lookup, or what we call constant time, where, because you're dialing a 5 and the next number is a 6, you can say, okay, well, what's the distance between the 5 and the 6? So you do a linear pass through the phone keypad and you calculate all those distances, and then you store that one time. So you don't have to recalculate that over and over and over again. And then you're effectively making like a lookup table from there. Like from this number to this number, it's this many spaces. So something along those lines. Cool. All right. So again, feel free to drop questions, comments on LinkedIn or on Twitch. And again, if you want your message to show up over here in this panel, you will need to come over to Twitch. But I am paying attention to LinkedIn. And Jasmine, again, I appreciate your question. All right, let's get to some more Q&A here. This one is a little bit related to a problem that I actually just chatted with somebody today about. They came by the live stream that I was doing at lunch, and they mentioned they were supposed to do an interview and the interviewers were late. So this question basically says, as a software engineer, do you follow up with the recruiter if they don't call you at the scheduled interview time? Heck yeah. They need to be respectful of your time. Yes, you want a job with that company, but they need to respect your time just as much as you wouldn't show up late for them. They shouldn't be showing up late for you. But people at a company get busy. Sometimes interviews run over, but they still need to be respectful. They shouldn't be scheduling like back-to-back things on their calendar so that if it does go a little bit over, they've still got a bit of a cushion before they go to the next interview. So for me, it's a bit of a red flag. Although in this case, the person that dropped by the chat, they're actually interviewing with a pretty big company, which to me even feels less excusable. If it's a big company, they should have lots of interviewers and nobody should be showing up late ever for an interview. So hopefully it worked out for them today. But yeah, I would say if you have a scheduled interview and they don't show up, absolutely you want to call and find out what happened. For example, just this morning, I had a calendar invite to go on the live stream at work, and I clicked on the link for the web interface that we use for the live stream, and nobody was there. And I'm like, what happened? Like, where is everybody? And I got on Slack. I'm like, where are you? And they wrote back and they're like, where are you? We're in the link. And I'm like, I clicked on the link in the calendar invite. And they're like, how long ago? And I always show up early to meetings, or I try to. And so I'm like, well, I clicked on it like 5 minutes before the meeting was supposed to start. And they're like, oh, well, we changed the link like 1 minute before the meeting actually started. So they actually changed the link and then immediately joined it. And so I had to close out. So, I mean, that could be one thing to look at is, if they sort of didn't show up, is it because you joined the wrong call? Maybe they joined the wrong call. But yeah, I would absolutely follow up with the recruiter. So in my job hunt back in December and January, I actually had this happen. I want to say it was with Datadog. I'm pretty sure it was with Datadog. They would phone me and get on the phone and say, hey, we want to schedule an interview. It's going to be Thursday at 2. And I'm like, okay, great, no problem. And then I would wait for a calendar invite to show up. So I knew not to schedule anything else Thursday at 2. And I didn't get a calendar invite. And so they basically followed up and they said, hey, you missed the interview. Like, what happened? And I'm like, you didn't send me a calendar invite. And they're like, oh, we thought you were just going to write it down and like show up. I'm like, well, how would I know like what the Zoom call is or what phone number to call? Like, you didn't give me any information unless you send me a calendar invite. And so it was just a miscommunication between us. And after that, the recruiter was really good at making sure I always got a calendar invite and had all the details. But you'd think for a company like Datadog, they're a big company, they're a public company, they should have had that sort of process ironed out. So if a recruiter doesn't show up, yeah, absolutely, you want to reach out to them. It's one thing to ghost a candidate if you have an interview and you actually like get through the interview and then they don't talk to you after that. That's called ghosting. That's bad enough. But when they don't even show up for the interview, it's probably just a mistake on their part. So yeah, I would absolutely follow up with them. Ingrid, good to see you over on LinkedIn. Ingrid says, I'm about to hire a junior, so listening was a great way for me to reorient. Yeah, good to see you in chat. Appreciate you swinging by. We'll have to grab coffee again sometime soon. So yeah, the whole idea with juniors is just make sure that you level set your team on like what's an appropriate level problem. Like, is this question that we're going to give them really appropriate for a junior dev? That would be like really, really important for sure. Let's see. Jove asks in chat, do you provide one-on-one tutoring services? Interview prep industry is hot right now. It sure is. I do all of my interview prep through interviewing.io. And that's mostly just because it's a paid platform. And it just gives me like one place that I can do all my billing and things like that. And so if you go sign up for an account at interviewing.io, you can then ask them like, hey, I want to sign up for like a 3-session coaching package or a 5-session coaching package with Ian specifically. You have to mention me by name and then they'll hook it up. So yeah, if you really want private one-on-one coaching, I do that through interviewing.io. But it is a paid platform, so just be aware of that. It will cost money, and it's not a small expense. Their platform's a little expensive. I only see a portion of that money because they're providing the whole service and the platform and the bandwidth and all that kind of stuff, and they're paying for a bunch of APIs to make all this stuff happen. So it's a little spendy. I am looking at another platform right now. I believe it's called, is that HackPen? Or HackerPen. I think it's hackerpen.io. Yeah. So I'm gonna drop that in chat. So I've been chatting with the team that's been building this. It's actually kind of a cool little platform. You can actually sign up and you can give people mock interviews through their platform. And so I've been kind of evaluating it lately. I would like to get to a point where I can actually charge people money for doing like a mock interview and like to do it more as like a professional coaching kind of thing. But I'm not there yet. So for now, I'm just doing everything on interviewing.io. So yeah, you can absolutely go connect with them if you like. But otherwise, if you want the free route, you're in the right place because I do all this for free. So there you go. All right, let's get to some other questions here. This was a good one, and I think Tech Dinosaur, if you're still hanging out in chat, I think you'll appreciate this one as well. Do software developers today have it easy with all the resources available in comparison to the older generation of developers? Yeah, kids these days, you don't know how easy you have it. Back in my day, we had to code uphill both ways in the snow. Um, it was a lot harder back then. We didn't have, I mean, we had the internet, but it certainly wasn't as prolific. We didn't have sites like Stack Overflow. It was kind of funny. Stack Overflow had an outage like a week ago, and all you see on Twitter is like, how do people on Stack Overflow fix things if they don't have Stack Overflow to reference? Um, yeah, it was harder back then. You had to basically have like actual books. So a book, they would take paper and they would write words on paper and they would put it together. Um, yeah, you would actually buy like these really thick books. They would literally be like 2, 3, 400 pages long, and it would have like the whole programming language or the framework or things like that. Like I've literally got stacks of these books. I could probably go grab like 3 or 4 of them and like show you. Like I've actually got tons of these books, and I've thrown many of them away. And since then, I tend not to buy physical copies of books anymore because by the time you buy it in a bookstore, it's actually out of date. And so I tend to only buy digital copies now or online copies that are going to stay up to date. Otherwise, yeah, you buy a book and it's out of date like by the time it hits the bookstore. Um, there are some like fundamentals that don't change. So books like Cracking the Coding Interview and so on, those books don't really change. I mean, they change, like they update it for like more common like interview problems and interview practices and things like that. But like the core things of like, we haven't had a new data structure in a long time. We haven't really come up with a new pattern of algorithm in a really long time. Like, search algorithms were mostly developed back in like the 60s and 70s, and we still use them today because we haven't figured out anything better. But kind of going back to the theme of the question here with Moore's law and things getting faster, memory and resources becoming cheaper, it kind of makes us a little bit lazy as developers, if I'm honest. It makes us a little lazy. Like 25 years ago, 26 years ago, when I was programming professionally for the first time, it'll be 26 years in April that I graduated. We didn't have like tons of RAM. We didn't have tons of disk space back then. And so we had to write very small code. We couldn't be super creative. We couldn't be very verbose. It had to compile down like really, really small in order to run and fit in memory, much less execute quickly. Nowadays, we don't think anything of like npm install, and we're pulling down like gigabytes of libraries, and we do like a Rails new, and you've got tens of megabytes of code that you're actually working through as part of the framework. So we kind of take that stuff for granted nowadays, where back in the day, like, chip memory was like huge, like physically big, and it was expensive. And now like a little micro SD card the size of my fingernail holds like half a terabyte of space. So it makes a big difference. That said, though, the idea of problem solving and decision making and those kinds of patterns, those are still the same. I think in today's world, though, with the proliferation of information and the internet and people like me out there sharing opinions on, hey, here's my take on how to make that better. I think we're all gradually making the world better for like the next generation of people that are coming into the industry. And that's what I love about the industry. We have a lot of people that want to help you. There's a lot of people out here that want to offer advice and ideas and perspectives on how to get into the tech industry, how to succeed in the tech industry, how to find those jobs, how to network, how to build resumes, how to get through technical challenges. Like there's a lot of us out there that want to help you out, and we're making it easier for the people following behind us to make that happen. And so by sharing those stories and sharing that information, it makes it easier for other people coming in. So for the theme of the question, like, do they have it easy with the resources available? I mean, it's much easier to find answers where you don't literally have to phone somebody and get them on the phone to ask them a question quickly, or you'd send an email and they might check their email like once a week kind of thing. Nowadays, I mean, things are a lot more, not instant, but a lot faster with notifications and things like that, and a lot more platforms where you can reach out to people. It certainly makes it easier. Yeah, I think as long as you have a good community. If you don't have a good community, then it makes it harder. And I think Zooey can kind of speak to that too, because Zooey and I have had chats about, finding good communities and finding mentorship and things like that, where you can find, like, there's a lot of communities out there, but do you feel like you fit in and belong in that community? That's an important thing to take into consideration, because there's lots of communities, but if you don't feel like you fit in or you don't feel safe in a community, then it's not really a community for you. I mean, it should be. I mean, let's be honest, it should be. It shouldn't feel like, an unsafe kind of toxic environment, but it can feel that way. Um, so yeah, I would say there are certainly a lot more communities now than there would have been like 20 years ago. And so in that regard, yeah, I think it's easier for sure to get into the industry and have people share that information with you. This is a good one. It was written specifically around Amazon, but I think that it's a good question no matter who the company is. Um, how can the interviewer know if the interviewee is cheating or not in virtual interview rounds? Isn't it easy to cheat for all the coding questions? I mean, it can be. Um, but as an interviewer, I mean, I've caught people even on remote mock interviews where they're like, "Oh, well, let me think about this for a minute," and then I hear them typing furiously. And then they come back a minute later going, "Oh yeah, it's, this kind of pattern and I'm going to solve it this way or that way." It's like, "Yeah, I heard you typing. I know you went and looked it up." But interviewers also, like good experienced interviewers, can generally tell when they give you a problem whether you've seen that problem before or not. They know the common points where people are like, "Okay, well, I think this about this design and I think I'm going to implement this part this way." It's like, "Yeah, okay." But we all have, like, 90% of people get stuck on this part of the problem. And if you breeze past that, it's like, you've probably seen it before. And we might actually straight up ask you, like, have you seen a problem like this before? Have you seen this problem before? And that's kind of a check for, are you going to be honest with us? And I did have that happen in a mock interview recently where the person's like, "Oh yeah, I've seen this problem before." I'm like, "Cool. Well, do you want to work through it anyway, or do you want me to find another problem? Because if you've already solved it, then all you're going to be doing is like regurgitating, what you've already done. And that's not a good use of time when you're paying for a mock interview. So do you want me to find another problem?" They're like, "Yeah, let's do another problem." I'm like, "Cool." And so I always tell people in my coaching, if you get to an interview and you are given a challenge that you've already seen, the temptation is really strong to just be like, "Oh, I'm going to play dumb and pretend I've never seen this before. And then I'm going to crush it. And they're going to think I'm amazing." No, they're going to know that you've seen it before. It'll be really easy for them to tell because of those common pain points. Like, we kind of design these problems where it's going to start off kind of easy and then it's going to get hard. And once you get over that hurdle, then it'll start to feel easy again. Then there might be like another hard part. We design them that way on purpose because we want to see if you're going to get tripped up where everybody else gets tripped up. And if you just kind of blast through the whole thing like it's no problem, then for us, it feels like, okay, like, have you seen it before? And then we might call you out on it from there. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But if we can see, like, if we can hear you typing and we know that you're like looking, like, our suspicion is that you're looking something up. And I've told this story on the stream too in the past where someone's like, "Hey, can I go look up this API call for how to use like a function in whatever programming language?" I think we were doing PHP at the time. And I'm like, "Sure." And I turned around to like get a bottle of water and I had my back to them for 30 seconds. And when I turned back around, they were on Stack Overflow and they were looking up the answer to the question that I gave them. And I'm like, "Dude, you told me you were going to like look up an API call, not look up the answer." Like, this is in a live interview. Like, I'm sitting right next to them and they're looking up the answer because they thought my back was turned long enough. So weird. People are like that. Yoda Gang 1111, good to see you. Thanks for dropping by. Give you some blinky lights and some applause. Appreciate the follow. Thanks for stopping by. Zooey says in chat, at the end of the day, cheating would just be cheating themselves. Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you going to accomplish? Like, you get through the interview, but then you get the job and you're still going to struggle in the job. That's not a great sort of feeling. And, also keep in mind, that's not the only round of interviews that you're likely to do. You're likely going to have several other rounds of interviews. When we give you a take-home assignment, we don't care if you look stuff up. But when you're doing like a technical challenge, we want to see that you can sort of solve this on the fly. This is also a really prime example of why companies will either make you sign a non-disclosure agreement so that you don't share what the problems are that you were asked, or when they find out that the question they asked got leaked on the internet somewhere, they stop asking that question immediately, and they'll dive into other questions that they have prepared, because they don't want people to cheat. They don't want people to game the system and walk into that interview going, "Oh yeah, I can totally crush this problem." It would be like if I went for the interview and I kind of struggled through it, and then I turn around and I give Zooey all the answers and be like, "Hey, they asked this question, this question, this question," and Zooey goes in, crushes it, and gets the job instead of me. How does that help me? Like, I failed the interview. I still have to go look for a job. Meanwhile, Zooey got the job because they had all the answers. And so it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do the next person any good. And like I said, seasoned, experienced interviewers will have a pretty good sense of like, okay, this was the common pain point. You like blasted through that, when maybe like that doesn't coincide with like asking you technical questions, and yet somehow you got over that hurdle like really easily. So we have kind of a checks and balance that we would typically do in an interview like that, to sort of smooth out the grading, or the rubric, that, as we would call it, for how well you get through the problem and where you struggle, and do you struggle where everybody else tends to struggle, and do you kind of start off with the same sort of unoptimized code that 90% of other applicants sort of start off with, and so on. So we see patterns in these problems as we present them, and if you go way outside of that pattern, then you look like an anomaly to us, and we're more likely to really scrutinize what's going on. So yeah, that would be my perspective on that. Jove says, what would you say is the baseline knowledge we should have before we start mock interviewing? Jove, are you saying about conducting a mock interview, like you are the interviewer, or that you are the candidate and the interviewee? Can you clarify that for me in chat? And then I'll restate the question with more context, just for the audio clipping and stuff later on. By the way, you may see a Stream Elements thing swing by. I am looking for people to help with like what we call chapter markers on YouTube. If anybody's got some free time and you want to help me out on YouTube, just go watch through an episode and just send me a list of timestamps of like, hey, at 14 minutes and 7 seconds, you asked a new question. And at 18 minutes and 4 seconds, you asked a new question. That would be immensely helpful for me to kind of go back and build those chapter markers. It'll help with search engine optimization and so on. If anybody's got some free time, I'd appreciate any help on that. Okay, so Jove asked a question in chat. What would you say is the baseline knowledge we should have before we start mock interviewing, both as an interviewer or as a candidate? I would say if you're going to do a mock interview for someone else, like you want to help them prepare, you need to have a good selection of questions that you can work through. You need to know them inside and out. You need to know multiple kinds of answers for them. Any good technical question should have more than one correct answer to actually solve it. And by answer, I mean algorithm. So you should be able to write that algorithm several ways, and you should be well-versed enough that if you start seeing your sort of mock candidate go in a particular direction, like there's one problem that I ask a lot in my mock interviews that can be a depth-first search, a breadth-first search, dynamic programming, or just an iterative, non-recursive kind of approach. And I can code all four of those. And I've seen other people code all four of those. There are like one or two of those algorithms that are way more popular that people tend to gravitate towards. And so I know those ones much better. But if I start to see them code, let's say the breadth-first search, it's like, okay, breadth-first search. Cool. I know approximately what they're going to do. And then be able to give them good feedback on what that process was. Like, hey, this is what I saw in your process. This part was good. This part could use some extra work. This part could use extra practice. But your communication was solid. Maybe like your problem solving, like you were able to identify it. Eventually, I had to kind of drop some hints for you to like figure out a few parts. And so it really comes down to how do you give good feedback for them to grow? Excuse me. One of the things that I say a lot about the Pramp platform, it's a good platform. It's a good place to do free mock interviews, but you never really know who you're getting paired up with, and you don't know what kind of feedback they're going to give you or what sort of level they are. And so it can be a little tricky being on Pramp to prepare well for a mock interview because you don't know who you're going to get signed up with. Like if I've been in the industry for 25 years and I know these kinds of problems inside and out, and I get paired up with somebody who's only been coding for a year and they give me a problem and I solve it, are they going to be able to give me like good feedback or quality feedback other than just like, wow, you did great on that? Like that doesn't help me. But if they don't have a lot of experience giving interviews or being part of interviews to go, hey, maybe work on this or that. Now on Pramp, they do give you some information ahead of time so that you can see like what the problem is, what the common sort of answer is, and a few talking points. But as the interviewer, you still need to be able to give good feedback at the end of that mock interview. And so recognizing when they're about to get stuck or sort of the common hurdles that I just talked about in the previous question, and be ready to sort of help them over that hurdle. Because as an interviewer, you don't want to see somebody hit a bump and then stay there. You got to get them over that bump to see how much farther they get. As a candidate, I think this comes back to just general interview preparation of how do you sort of practice your algorithms. And that kind of goes back to the YouTube videos that I talked about earlier. I've got a couple of YouTube videos I linked in chat about the LeetCode grind, around how to shortcut that LeetCode grind and practice different patterns of problems. I think that that's an important sort of thing to practice so that you've got good algorithmic thinking, that when you hear a problem, you can break it down into steps. But then also having a good process of what I call kind of the 4-stage process. Repeat the problem back to them, put it in your own words so that they know you understand what the problem is. Ask questions for things you don't understand. There may be things explicitly left out of the explanation, or there may be examples that they haven't given you that may break your code if you make assumptions. And so try not to make assumptions. Ask questions instead of making assumptions. And then the third part is like write out some notes or write out some pseudocode so that they kind of see the design of what your work is going to be before you actually start coding the real thing. And then step 4 is actually go code the real thing. So when you get to the pseudocode part, you want to use like really high level language. You want to give yourself the flexibility for how you actually go implement the code later, but still kind of rough out the idea of, okay, I'm going to need this kind of loop and it's going to call this kind of function and do this or that kind of work. So as much as possible, you want to try to design that out, not super deep, but deep enough that it's covering all your edge cases. I think that that's going to be the biggest help. And then ask them their opinion. I always coach people, especially on interviewing IO. I coach them like, hey, once you write out that pseudocode, ask the interviewer, what's your opinion of this? And I specifically tell them to use that phrasing. What's your opinion of this? Because if you word it this way, if you say one of these two things, does this look okay to you, or am I on the right track? Those are the most two common things that people ask me as the interviewer. And I usually coach them afterwards. It's like when you ask a question using those words, you project a lack of confidence in yourself and a lack of confidence in your skill. And so you have to ask, what's your opinion of this? Those exact words. What's your opinion of this? Those 5 words. And they'll tell you their opinion. If they think you're missing something, they may ask some leading questions. They're not just going to say like, oh yeah, this algorithm looks pretty good, but you missed this. They're probably just going to ask some leading questions about like, hey, what about, this sort of scenario or something like that. Like they'll use phrasing and wording that's meant to kind of provoke your thought a little bit deeper. Or they might say like, hey, this line of pseudocode was, decently vague. Give me a little more information about what that line of pseudocode may do. Doesn't mean you have to go write more pseudocode or break it down into even deeper levels, but they just want to make sure that you've fully thought through everything and considered your edge cases and so on before you actually start to code the actual thing. And so I would say just be prepared for that. So when you ask, what's your opinion of this? Listen really carefully to what they say. And if they're asking questions, they either want you to clarify something or they just want to make sure that you've thought through everything deep enough, and then go get started on the code. So as a candidate, that would be the process I would follow. So be ready for algorithmic thinking and then follow that 4-step process. And then as the interviewer, know that problem inside and out, backwards and forwards, know multiple ways of solving it, and be able to give the candidate quality feedback. In a mock interview scenario, we get to give the candidate feedback. In a real world scenario, we're typically told like, hey, don't say anything to them about how they did. because there's this fear in the tech industry that it's going to turn into a lawsuit if you say the wrong thing and they misconstrue it and they think that you're discriminating against them if you don't hire them. And so a lot of interviewers are told, like, don't give them any kind of feedback. Like, don't tell them they did well if they didn't do well, but don't tell them they didn't do well if they didn't do well. Like, just don't say anything at all. If they ask how they did, just say, hey, I've got a whole bunch of scores I need to tally up here and I need to coordinate with the rest of the team, so I can't give you any feedback right now. And just leave it at that. But in a mock interview scenario, you're there specifically because you can give them that feedback. And so it has to be good quality feedback. It needs to be pretty in depth about, like, hey, this part of your process worked out great. Your communication around this part kind of struggled a little bit. Make sure when you're writing out your code, you kind of take these things into account for optimizations and memory use and call stack and things like that. And so you need to be able to help give them really good feedback. So hopefully that helps you out. Stephen Hungry, good to see you in chat. In my Google interview, I got stuck in something impossible and the interviewer didn't give any hints or say it was impossible. Well, that sucks. They're not a good interviewer. I don't know that I've ever had an impossible situation. I could see some value in like an unsolvable kind of problem just to hear, like, what's your thought process? Like what would you do in a scenario where you can't solve the problem? That's an interesting one to think about, because I think it does show some level of humility, and some level of, like, I've taken this as far as I can. I actually can't do any more than that. In an interview, though, it feels really bad to do that. You don't typically want to give up on a problem and say, like, oh, I can't solve this. Like, what else have you got? Because in most interviews, they'll just shut it down and say, oh, if you can't solve it, then never mind. But that's not a great feeling as a candidate. And it's not a great feeling as an interviewer either, to see somebody struggle and then just you watch them, like, literally deflate and give up. But I think for companies like Google, like the FANG companies, they may present impossible scenarios just to see, like, how far could you take this? What could you do to try to solve parts of this? And then which parts of it are actually impossible to solve? We don't have enough compute power. We don't have enough RAM in the world. We don't have enough whatever to solve this in a reasonable amount of time. They may just want to hear you kind of, like, throw ideas out there, as we call it, like spitballing ideas, just to get some kind of idea out there and then say, that's as much as I can come up with right now. But it's really rare to have an interview problem be asked like that where there is no solution. So I would say if they didn't prepare you well for that, then that's kind of on them. It's not really on you as a candidate. I don't think that's really your fault. If they know that they're giving you something that's impossible to solve, that's on them. And I would actually give them that feedback. I would actually give them feedback to their recruiter and say, hey, I was asked this question. I looked it up afterwards. There is no answer for this. And it felt, like it was a very awkward situation in the interview because I couldn't come up with an answer. And they also didn't tell me it was an impossible scenario. So I would absolutely give them that feedback and see what they say. RC Maniac, good to see you in chat. Thanks for dropping by. Zooey says, that sucks that that's even a thing. I wish I could always get feedback. It's been super helpful when it's offered. Yeah. One little trick that I came up with on this last round of interviews that I did back in January was, like, companies generally don't want to give feedback, again, because they want to protect themselves. But here's a little trick I figured out. If you ask them for, hey, just, I understand that you can't give a lot of feedback, but, like, could you ask the team about a few things that I did really well? Like, what stood out that I did really well in the interview? They'll typically tell you what you did well. They probably won't tell you what you did not do well. But if you know what you did and they tell you the good parts, then you can kind of subtract that and figure out the bad parts. And then you could say, okay, well, something about how I did the technical challenge wasn't good, or something about how I answered those behavioral questions wasn't good enough. And so you can kind of, figure that out. So ask them for the good feedback. Ask them for things that you did really well that really stood out. Like, hey, like, just out of curiosity, what kind of feedback did the team give about things I did really well? And just word it like that and see if they come back and say, oh, they thought your communication was amazing and, like, your coding was great. It's like, Okay, well, I guess how I answered those behavioral questions kind of stunk. Or I guess, how I, presented blah, 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 maybe wasn't as good as it could have been. And then you can go back and you can ask other people for feedback. Like, hey, I did this interview. They told me I did this well, and this part I need more practice. Can you help me practice that? Work with a mock interviewer and see if they can give you some feedback on that part and get better at that part. So you can almost do it as a reverse psychology kind of thing. Ask what you did well, and not like, hey, what can I improve on for next time? Because they typically won't tell you that. Stephen Hungry says in chat, I took my first offer with no negotiations. Is that okay? Yeah, you got a job. High five. The total comp was over 2 times my old salary. Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. It was my only offer, so I thought I didn't have any leverage. Nope, not true. You still have leverage. You still have value and worth. That is your leverage. You don't need another job offer to have leverage. It helps, but you don't have to. You absolutely have leverage because of your background and your skill and what you bring to the team. That is your leverage. When they bring you that total compensation, you always want to try to negotiate your salary. And if they can't budge on salary, then you like ask for other stuff like equity and so on, especially if they're a public company. I guess they wanted me to be level 4, but the hiring committee only accepted me at level 3. Yeah, sometimes that'll happen. That happened to me, I think, with my Amazon interview as well. I applied for an L6 and they wanted to bring me in an L5. And I had a whole bunch of people scream at me like, no, tell the recruiter you will not take an L5. I'm like, well, if I don't take the L5, they're not going to hire me. And they're like, but if you take an L5, it's going to take that much longer to promote because it's like a 2-year path to promote up to the next level. Like you'll get the raise, but you're not going to get the title for like a long, long time. And so everybody that I talk to is like, no, don't take L5. Tell them you want L6 or you're walking. And I'm like, but I want the job. In the end, they didn't hire me for L5 either. So it wouldn't have mattered. But I did push the recruiter on it. I'm like, but I bring senior level skill. Like I'm a senior instructor and all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, but the team wants to bring you in at L5. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll apply for L5. At least I get the job. So is it okay that you didn't negotiate? Yeah, I recommend that you negotiate. You can always negotiate on the salary. Even if the company can't move, if you're doing it respectfully and you're just like, nah, this offer stinks, I want more money. You can't do that. You have to be respectful about it. And even if you don't say the offer stinks, I want more money, like you can still present it in a way that comes across aggressive and be like, oh, that's not the salary that I was hoping for. Well, that also comes across being really aggressive. What you need to do is you need to negotiate and say, these are the skills I bring. I obviously got through your interview challenge. The team wants to hire me. I'd really like to be at this level. What can we do? And just leave it in their lap. And they may come back and say, we really can't budge on salary. And say, okay, what else can we do? Like, let's talk about other parts of the compensation. Can I do a signing bonus? Can I do relocation? Can I do, extra office equipment? Like, is there something else that we can do to kind of make up for the lack of salary? But keep in mind that anything else they give you money-wise is going to be taxed pretty heavily as a bonus, and that could be as much as 50%. Typically, the bonus is taxed at whatever your tax rate is, which could still be like 30 to 40%, depending on where you live and tax rates and your tax situation and so on. And so any kind of signing bonus, any kind of relocation bonus that they offer, never spend 100% of that money because you're going to have to pay tax on that money. So keep that in mind. But you can certainly negotiate. Do you have to negotiate? I mean, if you're thrilled at the offer, like you made double your total comp, you don't have to, but you can. Companies expect it. They expect that you're going to do some amount of negotiation. There are companies that I know of in the Denver area specifically that say, no, we don't negotiate for entry-level roles because we want everybody to come in on equal playing level. Some companies say that in a maneuver to like lowball you because they don't want you to negotiate up, and they just say, no, we don't negotiate, but everybody comes in at that level, which isn't necessarily true. But this one company that we knew of through Turing, they were hiring our grads, and they were actually really transparent about it. They're like, nope, here's the offer, and everybody gets that offer. And we actually confirmed it with other graduates that had applied there and got offers that, yeah, everybody actually did come in at exactly the same compensation package. And so we felt okay telling graduates like, hey, if you go apply at that company, they're going to make you an offer and you cannot negotiate, but that's okay. It's a good offer. Other companies though, like, yeah, absolutely negotiate, but you don't have to. If you're really happy with the compensation package, great. A lot of people coming into the tech industry, they're already making like 2, 3 times what they may have made at a previous non-tech industry job. So those people are like, I went from like 20, 30 grand a year to like 90, 100 grand a year. Like, why would I negotiate higher on that? It's like, you don't have to, but you can, but you don't have to. So little things to keep in mind there. Yeah, keep dropping questions in. I appreciate all these questions in chat. I'm just going to go get caught up on a few things. RC Maniac says, I never told a company I had other offers, but I still asked for more. Yeah, I mean, when I started getting offers, I had a verbal offer, but it wasn't in writing. But I had a company say like, hey, we want to bring you on, write some curriculum for some training. Ended up not panning out anyway. But it was going to be for some consulting stuff. And I actually used that as leverage and said, hey, I've got a verbal offer. I'd really rather work for you. What can we do to speed up your process? And a couple of companies did. And then I started getting written offers. Then I got to go and say, hey, I've got multiple offers. I'd really rather work for you. What can we do? And that worked. It moved a lot of things a lot quicker. But I was also unemployed at the time. And so I was able to like squeeze a whole bunch more interviews in at the very end and end up with multiple offers that I got to choose from. So that's not going to be the case for everybody. But if you do have an offer, it absolutely makes a difference. But I've also had interviews where I was like the hiring manager, where I would say like, hey, do you have any other offers? And this one candidate said, oh yeah, I've got one other offer. And I'm like, well, tell me what it is. We'll beat it. And we did. We beat it by like 5 or 10% or something. And I thought we made a good offer. And it was, we really wanted this person on the team. We made an offer. We gave them a couple of days. And they basically came back and said, well, I've also got this other offer from Amazon. And so I think I'm just going to take that. It's like, well, why didn't you tell us you had an offer at Amazon? I mean, on one hand, as a hiring manager, I'd be like, we can't compete with Amazon. We're not even going to try to compete with Amazon. And so from that perspective, if I were in their shoes, having an offer from like a startup and then going to Amazon and say, hey, I have an offer in hand, can we speed this up? And then get an offer from Amazon out of it, then yeah, of course you're going to take the Amazon offer. But being on the receiving end, being at the startup where you make someone an offer and they don't tell you that they're even interviewing at Amazon, much less have an offer from Amazon, it kind of stinks because you kind of like you put in the effort of like, I'm going to go to bat for you. I'm going to vouch for you. I'm going to get you that extra money. I'm going to make this offer happen. And then you hit me with, oh, but I also have this have this offer from Amazon. There's no way we were going to compete with it. We're like, have fun at Amazon. But it kind of stunk, from our point of view, because we really wanted that person on our team. So, Zooey, good to see you. Thanks for dropping by. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate it. Cool. RC Maniac dropped a paragraph in here. Let's see. I feel like I got a semi-impossible problem once. I applied to a company. They had an online assignment set. One of them seemed possible, but no indication of what to do in a failure case. But the domain allowed for failure cases. The test gave me 100% passing, but once I submitted it, it only had 30% passing. So I brought it up. So I brought up that since it didn't tell me the results, I assumed invalid cases were provided without what to do in a failure case. And they said, thanks, but I still failed. Again, that kind of it feels a little disrespectful. But when you think about how like LeetCode and HackerRank problems are, they're like, oh, here's like 1 or 2 examples, go build your algorithm. But then when you actually run it through their test cycle, they're like, oh, aha, we caught you, here's a bunch of edge cases that you didn't account for. And so it does feel a little sneaky and a little backhanded when they trick you like that. I would say in any kind of take-home assignment like that, you want to try to reach out to them and ask some questions and say, hey, should I make assumptions on this? Should I try to code for those kinds of conditions? Like something's not clear here. Do you want me to make assumptions or do you want me to like do what I can and submit that and see if they'll give you some feedback? If the company won't give you feedback, then you just got to do what you can do. But it really stinks when they pull the carpet out from under you, so to speak, where you think you did a good job, you think it's passing, and then they kind of surprise you and say like, no, it's not. Oh, and it's a timed assignment. Yeah, that stinks. It sucks that happened. Sorry that you had that experience. Unfortunately, those companies exist, and it shows a very strong lack of good culture that they're trying to win people over. They want people to apply for these jobs, but then they treat them like that. Like, they're just going to give themselves a bad reputation as a place that nobody wants to go interview because the interview problems are impossible or, really badly worded or something like that. So yeah, that sucks. Sorry that you had that experience. All right, let's get to a couple more questions here. Try to think of whether I want to go down some rabbit holes on a few that are like not well worded. Like, how do I email after a bad interview? Like, well, what does that mean? Like, are you asking, like, what do I email to the recruiter if I know I've had a bad interview? That would be one thing. If I am the recruiter and you've had a bad interview, like, what would I send you? So yeah, there's a lot of perspective on that one. So I don't know that I'll go down the rabbit hole on that one. There's too much guesswork as far as like what the question's really asking. So this is a good kind of question. It's going to lean more towards like more senior level devs. But the question is, would a senior dev rather code a suboptimal, cleaner solution or an optimal solution with a tendency for bugs and unreadable code in an interview? So that's kind of my paraphrasing. I don't want to paste in the whole thing because it's kind of convoluted, but that's basically the gist. Like, as a senior dev, do I want to write unoptimal, easy to read code, or do I want to write optimized code that's harder to read and may end up with more bugs in that case? One company where I worked, they actually, they worked really hard to optimize some code. And then somebody pushed some code, and then suddenly, their performance of their production system started dropping pretty drastically. And what ended up happening is someone went into that block of code and said, this is hard to read. And they rewrote it in a way that was easier to read, but that stripped out all the optimization. And so it actually made the code a lot slower and a lot less performant, using more memory, all this kind of stuff. And so it caused kind of a cascade of problems. But as programmers, we really write code for other humans to read. Like, other people on the team are going to have to maintain that code. I would rather err on the side of readability and maintainability than erring on the side of really highly optimal code. In an interview scenario, though, there's a bit of a balance. You need to show them that you can work on something quickly, but that you can also optimize existing code. One technical challenge that I tend to give, there's kind of like here's like the initial algorithm to write, and then part two of the problem is, how do we make this optimal? How do we make it do more with, as many resources or fewer, and have it do extra things? Like, how do we extend this code? And for me, my hope is that a senior dev is going to dig into that part and show me what they're made of. Like, how are you going to make this better? If a junior or intermediate level dev gave you this existing code and I said, hey, take that code and make it also do this, how are you going to show me how you do that? What's your process for that? And I think that it's a good check for me, for a senior dev, to figure out, like, what kind of experience do you have in optimizing code and working through code like that. So as a senior dev, when I'm in an interview, do I want to write non-optimal code that's easy to read, or do I want to write optimized code? For me, it would depend a little bit on the company. If it's a FANG level company, they want the best of the best of the best, and I'm going to optimize the heck out of it as much as I can. As much as I have experience with a particular kind of algorithm, I'm going to try to make that as optimal as possible. If it's more like a startup, small, mid-sized company, I'm probably going to err on the side of more readable code. But I may ask the interviewer, or I may just comment as I go, like, hey, I know this isn't optimal. I'd probably write it this way if I had time to like highly optimize this. But for the sake of the interview, just to show you my process, I'm going to write it this way. And I did that in one interview where they wanted me to consume an API and calculate some stats. And I said, okay, well, as a senior dev, I know that I should be checking error, conditioning when I fetch that API. I need to check error codes, and, I need some sort of like retry if I can't connect, with some sort of exponential back off, like talking about all the experience I have on, like, I know what it takes to actually go call an API in sort of a proper way. for the sake of the interview, I'm just going to assume it's always there. It's going to answer. It's always going to give me back the structure that I expect. And they're like, okay, that's fine. So I think as long as you can communicate it verbally and say, this is what I would be doing, like in a real production system, I would be accounting for this. I think they'll be okay with that. I think that a lot of other companies are generally going to be okay with that too. But I think that in an interview scenario, you can also kind of set that expectation with your interviewer and say, this is how I'm going to try to design this. If you want me to do something different, please speak up and let me know. Or if you have an expectation about how I write this code, do you want me to write highly optimized code, or do you just want me to like get something that I can clearly explain? A lot of companies are like, do the best you can. Like they want to see your best effort. And so it may be an expectation to write optimized code, and that's okay too. But I think that that's a conversation you can have with your interviewer to find out what their expectation is. If you don't know their expectation, how are you going to meet it? You can't meet an expectation they don't share with you, or that you don't ask about. And so they may have in their mind like, oh, we're interviewing Ian. Ian's been doing this for 25 years. I hope Ian like writes really great looking code. Well, if I don't know that that's their expectation of me and I just go in and I write something kind of simple and they're like, wow, this guy's got 25 years of experience and wrote code like that. It's like, well, I didn't know that you had that other expectation. So you need to tell the candidate that. And so that would typically be a conversation that I have when I go into an interview and say, hey, this is how I work. This is a process that I follow. If you want me to do something differently, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to follow this process. And in my interviews that I did in December, January, I did have a couple of people say like, if you could change this or do it this way or that way, that'd be great. Okay, great. And the interviews went well. And, I made it through a lot of interviews. Some of them I didn't. But a lot of them I was making it through just fine. So it really depends on the company and depends on your experience level, but you can absolutely talk to them about their expectation there. RC Maniac says in chat, readability is important. It really is. Like from a maintainability point of view, like you never, like there was a thing that went around the internet. It kind of makes the rounds every now and then. And I started seeing it again, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, where it was like this block of code and it said like number of hours wasted trying to analyze and make this code better, with a comment of like, honestly, seriously, don't touch this code. Nobody knows what it does. And everybody that spends time trying to optimize it ends up breaking something else. So just like increment a counter here for how many hours you're actually planning to waste, and then just save that and move on. Like just don't touch this code. Because readability really is important, but sometimes readability's trade-off is not optimal code. Not always, but in a lot of programming languages, in my experience, the more optimized the code is, the harder it is for other people to read. Unless you've also got experience writing highly optimized code and you can look at it and see, oh, this is what they're doing. This is why they're doing like the memory map that way, or they're accessing these pointers in such and such a way just to speed that stuff up. More experienced devs are going to have an easier time reading it. It's kind of like piano sheet music. Like if you're just learning Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on the piano and you look at like these big, score arrangements with just tons of notes everywhere, you're going to look at that and go, I have no idea how to even like read this and comprehend what it's doing. Where if you see Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, written on the music, you can kind of play the notes in your head and go, oh, this is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. But when you've got like the full orchestra sheet, it's a lot harder to look at that and kind of imagine what's actually going on. But with more experience, you are able to do that. And it's kind of the same thing with code. When the code is easy and it's easy to read, it's a lot easier to kind of pick it apart and go, oh yeah, okay, I get what this is doing. Yeah, that makes sense. But when it's highly optimized, like without the experience, you're like, this is gibberish. Like, I don't know what all this stuff means. So I guess it works. I guess it's magic. But that also makes people less likely to want to go in and touch it and actually see what's happening. That's where a good documentation could come into play. So definitely want to think about that. But it is a trade-off that we make as developers. Cool. Yeah, if you've got other questions, always drop those in chat. Happy to provide those perspectives. So again, had a couple of folks ask about resume reviews. You can definitely drop me a resume at this link, techinterview.guide/resume review. As soon as I get a couple pooled up, I'll do another evening of resume reviews. And I'm trying to get some more guests on the stream for March, and may see if I can find someone else to help do some resume reviews. So I may do a push and say like, hey, for like third Thursday in March or something, it's going to be like resume review night. So I'm just going to like collect a whole bunch and we'll like rapid fire through them like we did in the past with Josh from Process Street. So something along those lines. If I can get a whole bunch of them pulled up, that would be great. Let's see what else is going on. So next Thursday, we got a panel interview. There's going to be 5 other folks on here plus me. And we're just going to be talking about developer relations and what that is as a job. Developer advocacy might be another title that you see, or developer evangelist is another title you might see. We're going to have a whole panel about that. What are those interviews like? What are their journeys into tech? How much coding do they actually do? All the good stuff. So that's going to be next Thursday. We got folks from PayPal and New Relic and a bunch of others. So please drop by, support that evening. It's going to be fantastic having them here. RCManiac says in chat, I had a friend who sent me their resume to refer to my work. Less than 10 minutes between me submitting the referral and the recruiter reaching out to schedule a discussion. That's cool. It's really nice as a company when you have someone inside the company refer a friend, because it shows that you like the company enough that you're willing to like have a friend work there too. It's also nice when you get to work with your friends. I've been at a couple of companies now where I've got to work with the same people at a couple of jobs. And it's really, really nice because you're familiar with them. You've already got the rapport. You know how each other works. You know how to communicate well. And it makes a big difference. It makes a big, big difference. There are a couple of folks in my career now, I think 3, maybe 4 people that I've worked with at multiple jobs. And it's always fantastic to like go work with them at another job. It's like, oh, you're here. It's great. Yeah, it's nice having that familiarity for sure. And it's also nice as a company, like if I get a referral, I'm way more likely to call them because now I don't have to go find other people. If you think your friend is qualified, I'm going to call them and see if I think that they're qualified, and we'll get them in the process. That's a lot easier than like, you know, scrolling through LinkedIn and trying to find a bunch of people on LinkedIn to fill a role. So cool. All right. Well, we've been going for almost an hour and a half. I think I'll do like one more question, or if you want to drop a question in chat, I'll do that, and then we'll wrap up for the night and go find somebody to raid. I got a couple of folks in mind to go raid. One of them's doing some web development. One of them's fixing a PlayStation. Could be interesting too. We've raided Chris Perillo a ton, so I think we'll give Chris a break. We got a couple of Python developers. So yeah. If you've got recommendations on who to raid, start dropping those in chat too. And again, if anybody's got some time to help go back and look at some old YouTube videos and like write out some timestamps for me, that would be a huge, huge help. And just like leave it in a YouTube comment or something so I can kind of go back and like click on them and verify. That would be a gigantic help for me. Just because work has ended up being a lot busier this last number of weeks. So I'd appreciate any help that folks can offer. All right, let's get to maybe one more question here. Let's see. So this one is kind of specifically worded, but I think that it brings up kind of a theme that I think would be good to kind of touch on. So I'm gonna paste this in about a particular behavioral problem. It's kind of behavioral / technical problem, but I think the theme of it is going to be kind of apparent as we go. So how do you answer a question like, what's your biggest technical problem? Like what's the biggest technical problem that you've had to solve? I haven't had any notable technical problems to solve. This is kind of a common theme that I see for a lot of entry-level devs. Like they're asking about my experience with such and such, and I don't have experience with that. Or they're asking me like, what's the biggest, production mistake you've made? But this is my first job. I've never worked in a production system. How do you even answer those kinds of questions? When they're asking those questions, they're really trying to rely a lot on your experience level. And what experience do you have working in some kind of environment like a production environment or a staging environment or even just a project environment where you've had to put some code out there and something broke? They're really just asking like, what's your experience been? How did you recognize it? How did you recover from it? How did you fix it so it doesn't happen again? Like, how are you accountable to like not letting that happen again? that's really the theme of what they're trying to get at there. Some of that is like, how do you learn from your mistakes? How do you, sorry, I just had to turn the heater off there. It's starting to get a little toasty down here. How do you learn from your mistakes? That's kind of the theme of what they're getting at here. When it's something like, what's the biggest technical thing that you've had to build or solve, especially when you're new in tech, you're not necessarily going to have a ton of experience to draw on. And that's okay too. You could still talk about like, you know, like I don't have like a major production level thing that handled millions of users. Like I've got this project that I had like 4 users. You could still talk about like, this was the biggest thing that I learned. This was the biggest takeaway that I've sort of got, my biggest sort of lesson learned, biggest thing that I'm going to take with me to future projects. You can kind of word your answer along those lines. When it comes to what was the biggest thing you've had to tackle, it could be, well, I didn't have a good understanding of authentication workflows and working with OAuth. And so I implemented that in a project just to get a little bit better at it. I'm not an expert at it by any stretch, but I understand kind of how that handshake works. And I'm a little bit better at it now because I was able to implement that in a project. But it is something that I want to continue to get better at. And so I'm already planning on working on a second project. Now, in an interview, if you say, oh, I'm planning on doing something, they'll be like, are you really? And so you generally don't want to make it sound like, oh, yeah, I'm planning to do this someday, maybe. You want to be concrete about it and say, it's something that I definitely want to get better at. Here's my plan. This is what I'm doing. This is my timeline. For example, when I was on my job hunt, I told, like, a lot of people are like, how do you stay up to date on your skills? It's like, well, I'm going through this nano degree program with Udacity to learn React. I'm about halfway through. I've got to wrap up a few things, but work's been busy and I'd rather live stream, to be honest. But it is something that I intend to finish. And so my timeline originally was end of February, but work got a little busy. So it's going to be sometime in March. The other thing I'm doing is I'm studying for the AWS architecture certification. That's going to take several months to study because it's a closed book exam and it's a proctored exam where they watch you work. And so you have to have all this stuff memorized. And so it's a huge amount of study. But that's a goal of mine, is to like get these certifications around architecture on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. And so I know that it's something I'm going to have to study. And so that one's going to take me a little bit longer. And so my timeline on that is like, maybe it'll take another 2 or 3 months to study all that and then go do the exam and hopefully I pass. And so if it's something where you recognize like you've learned something, but you want to continue learning and get deeper on, you need to have an active plan and tell them about how you're holding yourself accountable with a deadline to actually wrap that up and get better at a thing. For me, it's not that I want to become a React developer. It's just, I want to, if I sit down and work with a front-end developer and they're working in React, I don't want to like completely zone out because I have no idea what they're doing. I want to be able to understand like, what is a component? How does that kind of fit in? How do you even build a new component or extend a component, that sort of thing. And so those are the kinds of things that that I would mention in an interviews. Like if you so specifically to the question, if you don't have the exact kind of thing that they're asking for, you can give them something that we call tangential, a tangent, and say, this is similar. It's not exactly what you're looking for, but this is the most similar kind of answer I can give you. But let me know if this answers your question. And then just tell them, like, I don't have production experience, or I've never solved something enormous, but for me, it felt enormous to learn this. And it is something that I recognize that, I've only implemented once. And so I was able to do that one time. I want to get better at it. And so I've actively started adding it to 2 other projects just so I can continue to practice it and get better at it. And then you could say, like, is that something that you use here at the company? Like, is that something that I can continue to grow and develop here? And if it's not, then it's something that you can continue to do on your own. But if it is something, where they say like, oh yeah, we use OAuth here as well, you'll get lots of practice in that. I'd be like, that's great. I want to get into that. So it shows them that you've got that active interest in learning and expanding your skills and things like that. So that's how I would word that kind of thing in an interview where you don't have an exact example. You can still give them something related it just has to be related. Like you don't want to say like, oh, well, I've never solved like hard technical problems, but I built this cool website, or not that that wasn't a good accomplishment, but if it's not really relevant as an answer for their question, then it doesn't really benefit you as a candidate. And so you do need to kind of break the problem down a little bit and try to understand like what are they really asking here. So in this case, what's the biggest technical challenge that you've solved? You just need to tell them like, this is something that I didn't know. I implemented it in a project, and so I had to learn this skill and that skill, and this is how I implemented it. And it's something that I want to get better at. And so I've started the implementation on another project just so I can continue to get better. Is that something that you use here at this company? Like, is that something I could continue to get better at here? And put the question back on them. Cool. All right. Well, we've been going an hour and a half. I think I'll wrap up there. Any suggestions on a raid? Got a handful of viewers left here. If you've got a suggestion on somebody to raid, we'll go raid them on Twitch. Thanks for everybody that stopped by on LinkedIn. Appreciate the questions, Jasmine. Appreciate you dropping by and leaving those for me on LinkedIn. And Ingrid, good to see you as well on LinkedIn. And everybody that's been chatting here on Twitch. It's always fantastic seeing all the questions pour in and all the commentary and people helping each other out and greeting each other. It's fantastic. I love the community side of doing this kind of stuff. So blinky lights and hand claps all around for everybody. You're all great. So I appreciate you dropping by and supporting the channel and so on. Tell friends, please tell friends. Have them come by too. I'd love to grow a bigger audience here. But yeah, if you want to see, who can we go raid? You got no one right now? I think we'll go raid Radaber. Yeah, I think we'll go raid them. I think we raided them the other day, but we'll go raid them again. Alrighty, everybody. We will go raid this person, and we'll go hang out with them for a little bit. And stop doing that. Yes, I want to raid a channel. There we go. All right, cool. We'll go raid them, and we'll see you over in their chat. And thanks for hanging out, everybody. We'll see you soon. Cheers.